I'll hit it. Got it. Got it. Okay.
Hi, John. How are you today?
Great, Gina. How are you doing? You look wonderful.
I'm great. It's great to see you.
Good to meet you too. At last, in person. We've been meeting for over the phone and every other way.
Yes, we have. So I'd like to introduce you to our audience today. John is the author of Deadly Depths. He has been a lawyer and a teacher and a writer for more than 25 years. And John is originally from Boston. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, John?
Well, you summed it up pretty well there. I started in Boston, grew up in Boston, as did my wife. For the first 30 years, we lived in Boston, and of our lives, I went to the oldest school in the country, the oldest existing school in the country, Boston Latin School, founded in 1635. That's irrelevant, and then to Harvard College, and then we're from where? Into the United States Air Force for 3 years. And at the end of that time, with absolutely no idea of what I wanted to do with my life, I went to law school, Boston College Law School, and then practiced law, trial work for a couple of years, 3 years. And then I decided that that is not for me. So I thought, hey, I got to find a new career. So I went back to Harvard Law School and got a Master of Laws degree that led to a teaching career, and got a wonderful offer from the heart of our hearts, which is Villanova Law School, and I taught there for 47 years. But
Wow.
About 25 years ago, I found a second occupation, calling, whatever you call it, and that is writing fiction. But I think you're going to talk to me more about that as we go along. And we live in Valley Forge. I should mention that coming to Villanova brought us to one of the most historic places in the country, which is Valley Forge. And it's been an absolute delight living here.
That sounds wonderful. Now, in addition to your new book, you have a long-running series, correct?
That's right. Yep.
And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. You bet. So far, this is the 7th book, the book that you showed, Deadly Depths.
Mm-hmm.
This is the 7th novel. The first 6 were a series, and it was a series based on, I always write in the first person, and they're mystery thrillers, and they're published by a wonderful publishing house. It's called Ocean View Publishing. 2 of the greatest people in the world are my editor and my publisher, Bob and Pat Gusson, and I just absolutely love them for so many reasons that I can't even count them. Anyway, we've been through 7 novels together, and as you said, the first 6 are a series. First 6 were a series. And in that series, I had a lead character, and the lead character was, by coincidence, a criminal trial lawyer, and his name was Michael Knight, young 27-year-old, who only aged slower than I did, over 6 novels. But at the end, after 6 novels, and it's a funny thing about writing fiction novels. What you do is you actually formulate a world. You put together a world, a setting, which can be all over the world. You populate it with characters. And when you populate it with characters, you pick people that you enjoy being with, because you're going to spend hundreds of hours with them over the course of writing a novel. And when I sit down to this computer to write in the morning, I leave that world completely and I go into this world. And so the people that I pick to populate it have got to have 2 requirements. Number one, they have got to be interesting, absolutely interesting. Some of them are good, some of them are, but even the ones have got to be interesting. And they got to be people that I want to live with, for over many hours, over usually a year or 2 years.
Or kill.
The lead character is the really important one, and that was Michael Knight. And you get to love these people. I just absolutely love Michael Knight after I've lived with him through 6 novels. I feel like he's like my brother, my young brother. But in spite of all of that brotherly love, I came to realize that, son of a gun, that poor guy has barely survived the horrible messes I've gotten him into over 6 novels. And the poor kid needed a personal life. I had to give him a break. So I'm putting him on sabbatical for a year. And that meant starting a whole new series. And the new series begins with Deadly Depths. And in picking a new character, by the way, you had to pick a new name, right? Am I okay if I continue? I don't want to bore you.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear.
Oh, okay. In picking a new character, by coincidence again, he happens to be a law professor at a New England law school. But the question is, what name are we going to give him? And we picked the name Michael Shane, Mike Shane, and that was for a sentimental reason. And the sentimental reason was this: about 25, 30 years ago, honey, I think, about 30 years ago, for absolutely no good reason, because I had no interest in it whatsoever. And with no experience and no talent whatsoever, I'm sure, I wrote a mystery short story.
Okay.
And on the advice of an exceedingly kind teacher, probably overly kind, I sent it to a magazine. And the magazine I sent it to was Mike Shane's Mystery Magazine. Mike Shane was the private detective of a great writer at that, mystery writer at that time. Anyway, give God a chance and it'll give you a miracle. And he did. They actually bought it and they published it. And boy, I'll tell you, I went in that one jump. I went from a negative interest in writing to being absolutely, totally hooked, absolutely hooked. And boy, this has given my wife Lois and I just a grand ride through 7 novels and about 30 short stories in and Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazines. It has been a miracle, and we've loved it. Hey, could I throw in a quick comment here, Gina?
Yeah.
Don't mean to babble, but but it just occurred to me that there are going to be people who are going to watch this interview, and I bet there are going to be people out there who are thinking of writing, who are considering, writing fiction. And if I could make a very quick, short suggestion, do you know what's a great place to start? Because most of my friends who say, hey, I want to write, I'm going to start writing mystery, and I'm starting my first novel. Well, don't do that. Don't do that. Start with a short story. Start with a short mystery story. There are a number of mystery magazines out there that are open as markets. You can write in a short burst and make all the mistakes that you can. I wrote short stories after that first one. I got enough rejection slips over the next 6 years to paper this and every other room in our house.
Oh, wow.
But I stuck with it. And through the sticking with it, you learn the trade. You learn the trade. And you really have to learn the trade because there's a lot to learn about this business. Not as easy as it looks. But at the end of 6 years, I sent one of those short stories to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine.
Yes.
And I got back the rejection slip, which I expected. But God love her, the editor-in-chief, Eleanor Sullivan, she hand wrote in the margin, "You're getting close. Don't quit." Can you imagine?
That's sweet.
And can you imagine what that did for? So I came home and by golly, I got to work on the next one. And she bought the next one. And golly, she bought the next 25, as a matter of fact. But that was the start of it. But I recommend starting with a short story. It's a great way to learn. You've got a number of markets out there that are a lot easier than novel markets to break into. And I tell you, it works better than anything I've ever found.
That's such great advice. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Now I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
The very first line of Deadly Depths is, "Hey guys, no class today. The old man died."
Yeah.
Now there is something special behind that line. Can you share it with us?
Sure. In each of the 7 instances of writing a novel, something has got to start it. Something's got to kick it off. And it's usually the tiniest grain of an idea. In each case, it's a grain of an idea. And for Deadly Depths, I was casting about for what's my next novel going to be about.
Right.
Had absolutely no idea. But what popped into my mind was a memory from about 20 years ago, maybe longer than that. when I was teaching at Villanova Law School, I'd walk across the campus to have dinner. And in walking across the campus this one day, son of a gun, a student drives across, to my right here. I can still see it. And he rolls down the window and he yelled to another student. He said, it was Pete at that time. "Hey, Pete, no class today. The old man died." And I thought, oh, wow, boy, is that a quick dismissal of probably a long and productive life. And it just stung when he said it. And it remained stinging in the back of my mind for 20 years. And then all of a sudden it popped up. And when I'm looking for an idea to begin, I thought, hey, why not? So that became the first. And when I start a novel, I simply sit down and I type that first line, the first line that, it's going to lead it on. Because at that moment, I have no idea whatsoever of where it's going to go. Absolutely. It's like Lee Child writes the same way. I just open my mind. I really believe God puts the ideas in my mind. They go from me into the computer, and I'm as surprised as the reader is at the twists and turns that the story takes. In this case, for example, the old man died. Really? Why? How?
Yeah.
Was it? It turns out the police say it's suicide, and as we say, my lead character said, "I had no chance. Professor Holmes would never commit suicide." So that sends him on a quest for what really happened, and that takes him, and I know you've read the book, Gina. It takes him all over the world. Takes them to some of my favorite places in the world. That's another thing you get to choose, is you get to choose your favorite places. For example, I've always loved the Bayou country of around New Orleans. So I got a chance to explore that with all of its alligators and its snakes and its, I found that exciting. And the people who live down there. And Montreal's another favorite place. Jamaica is a favorite. The Caribbean, the home of the golden age of piracy, and so you get to take it anywhere that you want. But the ideas just pop. Some people actually plot out their entire novel before they begin.
No story maps for you.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I couldn't possibly do that. Lee Child doesn't do it. Lee Child writes the same way. They call them pantsers and plotters. Plotters and pantsers. Plotters are those who plot the whole novel out completely. Pantsers are those who fly by the seat of their pants, as the saying goes. And as Lee Child said one time, if I had it all plotted out and I simply had to go back and write it from the outline, I would bore myself stiff, and I probably would bore the audience, bore the readers as well. So we let it come and surprise us, and then we put the surprise onto the page. I find when I read novels, I am unfortunately very easily bored. And if the novel slows down, by golly, they've lost me. And I believe there are other readers out there who are in the same boat. So I try to keep the suspense. Never let the suspense lag. Never let the action lag. Voila.
So how do you keep your plot points from one novel to the next if you're like just flying by the seat of your pants? I mean, how do you remember all that important stuff as you're going into the next novel?
Oh, that is a good question. It's a funny thing. I think that I enjoyed writing this novel, researching and writing this one, even more than the other six. And I absolutely loved writing the first six. I don't demean them. It's like picking a favorite child in a way, Gina. But I really think this has been my favorite. And the reason is because the research has been absolutely, I've found it fascinating. And the reason for that is this. I might say at the start that it took me about a year to write each of the other six novels. And that's with a lot of research. But this one took 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
And the reason is that I originally set a challenge. I put a challenge to myself. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I could take three of the most interesting eras, centuries, three of the most interesting periods of history, centuries, that are perhaps hundreds of years apart, and let some particular incident originate in the first one and then pop up in the second one and then come to a climax in the third one, which would be the current day. And that's exactly how it turned out. The original, the first century was the 1500s. And the people that inhabited that century were, in my case, the Aztecs, the civilization of the
Yeah.
Aztecs, about whom I knew absolutely zippo before I began. I knew nothing about them. And as a matter of fact, I've talked to a lot of friends during the last couple of years. Nobody seems to know any more about them than their name. And by the way, we got the name wrong too, because the Aztecs never heard the word Aztec. They call themselves the Mexica. But in any event, I found the Aztecs a fascinating, absolutely fascinating chapter of history. And something that happened among the Aztecs then pops up again 200 years later in the life of Captain Henry Morgan during the golden age of piracy. And so
Yeah.
there's an entire incident sequence there, all of which is followed through from beginning to end by my main character, who is researching all of this as he goes through it and noticing the connection. And then the final is the current century, and most of the novel takes place in the current century. And the current century involves a nation called the Maroons, which most people have not heard of, but it's a nation of former slaves in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica. And so the trick was to write a plot that is uniform and is lived through by my main character in terms of his meeting people and doing research and so on, that begins with the Aztecs, pops up again with the pirates, and then concludes in the current day. Not all of which is to solve the murder of Professor Barrington Holmes. Amen.
And it sounds like with all, you had a ton of research here.
Yeah,
because
ton.
I mean, there's a
Big
lot
time.
of stuff in this book. So what was the most interesting thing for you
Wow,
to learn about?
That is a very good question, and it's got to be interesting, because one of the things that I just preliminarily, what I like to do with a novel is this. Maybe it comes from years of teaching, but I want the reader to do two things. I want the reader to thoroughly enjoy the story, to pick it up, and as so many of the reviews that you've been able to to show, reviews that you've been able to obtain for the book, so many of them, that, thank God, there've been so many 5-star reviews, and they have all said that the tension never lags, the excitement never lags, and so on.
Yeah.
And that's the trick, to give them an exciting read that they don't want to put down the book. And that's been the comment of so many of the people that you've acquired reviews from. That's the primary interest, to entertain. That's the big deal. But secondly, and without their knowing it, I want them to take away something in terms of a knowledge that they didn't have before, that they have acquired. For example, a rather deep knowledge of the traditions of the Aztec people, for example, of the battles of Captain Henry Morgan on the sea, and the life of the Maroons in Jamaica, and a lot of other stuff in between, without slowing down the book, without slowing it down, and slowing down the pace of the book. The original question you asked, and I just remembered it, was what was the most interesting? Boy, that's again like picking your favorite child. I think probably the most fascinating thing I learned was the history of the Aztec people. And if I could just briefly tell you why. The Aztecs began around 1400, and the Aztecs were a little tiny tribe in northern Mexico. They were a nothing. They were just a little band of nomads, little hunter-gatherers. They were thrown out of their land by all of the other tribes around them. Why? Because they were the weakest tribe around. So they start wandering aimlessly, just aimlessly wandering south, looking for a home. And they finally settled in the central part of Mexico. And the question that absolutely fascinated me was, how can this little band of nothing nomads become, in a very short period of time, one of the largest, most powerful, most dominant, most culturally advanced civilizations in the world? I mean, compared to the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, in a very short period of time. And what I found fascinating was the whole progress of their culture was based on the combination of two things working together. And without either one of these things, nothing would have happened. And the two things are fact and myth, fact and myth. The fact was these people had to build their city in central Mexico, because they found there what their chief god, their primary god, Huitzilopochtli, told them you would be looking for before you build your city. And that is an eagle standing on a cactus with a snake in its mouth. By the way, that's a central emblem in the Mexican flag even today.
Yes.
All right, so they build this city. The problem is that their religion, and here's where the myth comes in, their religion tells them that the god of the sun, in order to keep him alive, we've got to feed him enough, believe it or not, human blood daily poured into the earth in order to give him the strength to be born every morning, to make that trek across the sky, and then to die every night at sundown. We've got to provide enough blood and every single day. The question arose then, well, what is enough? Because if we don't provide him enough, he will die and all of us will die with him. And believe me, they believed this to the core.
Right.
Enough, it turned out to be, according to their high priest, enough turned out to be one human sacrifice to provide blood. One human sacrifice, are you ready for this, Gina? Every 10 minutes. So with
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, multiply that by the number of days. How many? That's what, 14,000 or something a month, something like, an enormous number per year. So the fact is they would have run out of their own people if they drew, the human sacrifice from their own people. So what they began doing is, and here's where the fact sets in, they began going to war with their neighboring tribes and conquering their neighboring tribes in order to conquer captives to use as human sacrifices. And as they conquered more and more tribes, their nationality grew and it grew and it grew. The final point in a very short period of time was that they had conquered over 500 city-states around them. Their rule reigned from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico, all the way down beyond Guatemala, into Honduras. They ruled all of that territory. They ruled over 6 million people. I mean, in a short period of time, that is magic. And not only did they grow in size and power, but they grew in culture. They had schools of dance, art, music. They had compulsory education for their children, and compulsory education for the children of their slaves. Believe it or not, they were unique in that respect. Anyway, all of this went on until bang, the Spanish explorer Cortez came over. And when the Spanish explorer Cortez came over, he went immediately to Central America to find this city of gold. And he did, and he conquered it, and totally destroyed it, so that you wouldn't even know there was a city there to begin with, this city of gold. So in a 200-year period of time, one of the greatest civilizations in history came into being, existed, and gone. And so gone to the point that all of the friends I've talked to know absolutely nothing about what they accomplished. Can I just throw in one last comment? We owe them for a number of their inventions. You know what I'm most grateful to them for? Believe it or not, they were the ones who invented or gave us chocolate.
Really?
Yeah, without them, no Hershey's, no chocolate.
It'd be hard to live in Pennsylvania without chocolate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, we're both Pennsylvanians.
So it sounds like there were a group of people that, you can't really have a lot of respect for. You couldn't really like them.
Right.
So do you write your characters like that? People that you don't like? And are they difficult to write?
Actually, no, they're not difficult. In fact, they're fun. They're a lot of fun to write. Some of them are more fun. I remember that all of my first 6 novels seemed to be the center around mafias of one sort or another. The first novel was Neon Dragon, and that's centered on a mafia that most people don't even know exists, and that's how they're able to exist, and that is the Chinese Tong. Most people think the Tong existed in the 1920s. Not so. Tongs exist in every Chinatown in America, and they thoroughly control, as a mafia only can, every shop and every business in Chinatown. That was Neon Dragon. The second one was Frame Up. By the way, I've got to tell you, because it just occurred to me, I can handle the 100,000 words it takes usually to write a novel. I cannot, for the life of me, to save my life, I cannot condense those two into a 2-word title. I'm incapable of doing it. So the most brilliant thing I have ever done in my entire life, and it was brilliant, was to marry a girl who can. And that's my law. And by golly, she comes up with every title for every book and short story. But anyway, let's see. Frame Up was about art theft and art forgery, and that got us into the Russian mafia. And in the course of 6 books, I've gone through the Russian mafia, the Chinese mafia, the Italian mafia. Of course, can't leave them out, especially coming from Boston. Who else? Oh, the Romanian mafia. Honey, can you catch that? The Romanian mafia. And what I find is that the particular characters, the particular mafia members, have a human side to them, as well as being in the business that they're in. And so I find that I can enjoy being with these people, while I'm writing, as well as talking about the things that they do. There is a humanity in there somewhere, and that's what's fun to find. So it's very easy to write about people who ordinarily you'd say, not such a hot character.
So you mentioned your wife, Lois.
Yeah.
And how instrumental she is in choosing your titles. But I know she's a very big support for you. And what else does she do to completely support you through this process and for the last 25 years of writing?
You're right. Oh boy, that's an interesting question to answer. I guess the most fundamental answer to that question is that I would not have done any of this without Lois's encouragement, inspiration. Whenever I write a chapter, and the way we work is I write a chapter. I do not go to outside. I don't ask anybody outside of Lois to read it. I trust her implicitly, and she reads every chapter when it comes off the typewriter. And if she says, good, that's it, good, then it goes in the box. That's chapter 1, and then on to chapter 2. So she's my first reader of everything. Heaven knows she puts the title on it when it's finished. I'll tell you one thing that Lois did for me. During those 6 years when I was getting rejection slips for the short stories, you know what she did? Because I could have given up. I mean, that's discouraging. 6 years of nothing but rejection slips. But what would happen is I'd finish a story. I would go to the post office. We had postal boxes, and I'd drop it in the box. And as soon as I got home, Lois would say, now begin the next one. Start writing the next short story. All right, I would. I'd start writing. So now I'm halfway through that next short story when I get the rejection slip for the one that I just mailed. Now that rejection slip would have cut the whole career short, but I am halfway into it. I'll finish this story. And that process kept repeating and repeating and repeating. And it kept me going for 6 years until I finally got that note from Eleanor Sullivan, and she bought the next one.
That's amazing.
There are just so many things that she does. Number one, she's my number one rooter, and she's in my corner. It's not so much rooting; we're a partnership, and we encourage each other along that line.
It's amazing that you've got her.
I wouldn't do it without her.
I'm glad. So I know you have done a lot of book events for this launch, but what's next in your queue here?
For book events, there's another thing Lois says that I couldn't do. She calls libraries, she calls book clubs, bookstore, Barnes and Nobles, and over these past years, she has built up a large list of bookstores and so on, and she'll get back in touch with them and line up dates for us to do book talks and book signings and that sort of thing. So we've got more of the same coming up. We've got a Barnes and Noble coming up. We would have one at the Barnes and Noble they called the Harvard Coop in Cambridge and Harvard Square. We've done it for every one, but we just can't get up there this year to do it. But we would otherwise. That's right. On the big one. the big one that's coming up is this. There is a thing called the University Club of Washington, D.C., and apparently it's a fairly big deal. And thank God we have been invited to partake in what they call the book fair of the University Club. And for one day of the year, they open the University Club to non-members.
Mhm.
And they invite people to come in. And so they, I bring books there, and I'm able, as readers come in, able to talk to readers and sign books and, that sort of thing. So we're kind of looking forward to that. Washington's always a fun place to go.
That sounds exciting.
It is. Yeah, we really enjoy that.
Okay. And what's next on the horizon for writing?
Oh boy, that's the killer question. You know what I've got to wait for? Two things. Number one, after 2.5 years of writing it, I have to give my brain a little cooling off time. And I told you I have got the greatest publisher in the world, and I'll tell you one of the great parts of these people is that they every other publisher that I know of, talking to friends. Friend of mine hands in a manuscript. He's a practicing lawyer, so he has very little time. Hands in a manuscript and says, all right, next one due 6 months from today. That's the deadline. Bob and Pat have never given me a deadline. They say to me, make it the best novel you possibly can, and when it is, send it to us. And so that's been wonderful. So I'm not under any pressure. So I'm going to wait till another, one of those, hey, Pete, the no class today things floats through my mind, and then we'll be back at it. Oh, we also have another thing. We have 2 short stories coming out soon. We got a short story that will be out soon with Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, and also one that will be coming out in Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine.
Oh, that's exciting. I'll be looking forward to both of those.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for visiting with us today. We really appreciated having you. And listeners, you can find him at johndobbyn.com and check out his newest book, Deadly Depths.
Thank you, Gene. It's been a pleasure.